Well, what a win for Anthony Joshua against Francis Ngannou, in arguably his most brutal knockout to date. Now, in terms of the fight itself, it was clear AJ and his team of Ben Davidson, Lee Wiley had done their homework for this. And in round 1, Joshua noticed the shift to the southpaw stance from Ngannou and immediately looked to exploit it. And Ngannou's tendency to parry with the right hand from either the orthodox or southpaw stance was clearly an area they wanted to exploit. And parrying the jab isn't inherently a bad thing, but the way he parried and braced himself put him right in line of Joshua's right hand. Well, it was also just a fundamental 101 from Joshua versus a southpaw, getting on the outside position while throwing the right down the line. And they had clearly prepared to try to exploit Francis when he turned to this stance, as this was something he did versus Fury as well, and there wasn't that surprise factor for this one. In round 2, there was maybe a little bit of urgency in Francis to get back into this fight and gain some respect. However, once again this played right into Joshua's hands. Now, before the second knockdown, Joshua had managed to counter Ngannou with the right hand by drawing out the jab, slipping to his right, just enough to set the right over the top. A classic counterpunch. Now, exactly a minute later in the round, he set him up again for the second knockdown. But for AJ, he did a terrific job in terms of drawing out, and by using his jab, well, he also just showed perfect timing with this. And that actually really reminded me and was reminiscent of Mayweather's pull counter, or even Thomas Hearn's chopping right hand. And I guess for the final knockdown, it was just beautiful devastation. Francis was clearly hurt from the initial knockdown, and instead of bracing with the high guard, stuck out the lead hand, creating that gap for AJ to land a huge right hand. And overall, it was just a fantastic finish. But AJ did what he was meant to do tonight. Personally, I thought going into this, it was maybe going to last a little bit longer, but credit to AJ for getting the job done so quickly. Now, for Francis Ngannou, I totally understand the confidence he had, especially after the Fury fight, and maybe that he could do the unthinkable. And even I was impressed with his whole aura this fight week, with the belief and confidence he had to defeat AJ. Even at times I was second guessing if Ngannou could do it. But at this level, against big punchers in boxing, he was always going to get caught at some point. Now, I think this is also a lesson in terms of the striking difference between MMA and boxing, and I'm not in any way saying he's bad, but boxing is just at a different level to these guys in my opinion. But, you know, credit to Ngannou for taking on this challenge, and I'd like to see how he gets on against more fringe contenders maybe. Or maybe a move back to MMA would be the best route for him going forward. Now, I guess for Anthony Joshua though, so you'll have to wait and see what happens with the Fury-Usyk fight, plus the rematch to get out the way. But maybe a rematch with Joseph Parker, or even a potential title fight with Hrgovic if the IBF title gets released. And overall, I'm just really excited to see what AJ does next. And also a huge credit to Ben Davidson and Lee Wiley doing their homework and getting the job done. Now, this was in fact a very slow-paced fight for the most part. And if you guys watch my tactical overview before the fight, you will have seen me talk about Zhang's slow pace and that he does start to tire in the later rounds, as seen and evidenced in the Hrgovic fight. Now, I watched the fight on DAZN and the commentators seemed to be a bit puzzled by Zhang's approach, but the thing for me, he's always fought at quite a slow pace for the most part. He's an aggressive counterpuncher, waiting for the opportunity to land. He's never been a fighter with a huge output. But for Parker, the game plan, it was actually quite a shaky start in my opinion. I feel he was looking to move to his right to avoid Zhang's deadly right hook, which did make sense. However, obviously caught Joe in the third, as he was right in line for the southpaw cross. But after this, Parker did a very good job keeping Zhang at bay with quick throwaway punches, something that was also touched on in the tactical overview by Zico. In hindsight, I think Zhang should have probably taken a few more risks after the first knockdown. However, he continued to fight at that slow pace, probably thinking he would get more opportunities to land like the first knockdown. Nevertheless, Joe also did a great job after this, continually giving different looks and level changes, which Zhang really struggled to work out as he would get caught with Parker's right hand coming into distance. Despite this, Zhang was still able to control the centre and push back Parker in the 8th round for that second knockdown of the fight with a right hook. But I feel at this point Zhang's energy had dropped massively, and for Parker, he just had to use those quick throwaway punches and bursts to keep him at bay for the rest of the fight. And overall, it was just a very disciplined performance from Parker despite the 2 knockdowns, and personally I felt he did enough to win this one. After the fight, it was also revealed there would be a rematch, and personally I can see the same outcome, unless Zhang looks to really stick it on him early. But yeah, huge congratulations to Joe Parker. It's been some 18 months for him, after so many saying it was done for him after that Joe Joyce fight. Well, we also have to give credit to Andy Lee and the work he's done with him over the past 12 months, and that Kronk background is definitely playing its part, while the fact he was also a southpaw himself no doubt helped him with the tendencies of what Zhang would do in this fight. Now, the other fight in this card was obviously Vargas versus Ball, and there was quite a lot of controversy after this fight, with people claiming a robbery. Personally, I actually had Ball winning none of the first 6 rounds. It wasn't until that knockdown in the 7th that things started to really work for him. Now, despite this, I don't think it should have been ruled a knockdown in the 7th round for Ball. However, he got that decision, and the momentum of the fight completely swung in his favour, and he was able to land some big left hands and right hooks. Before that, I felt he was doing quite a poor job in terms of setting up those punches. He wasn't using the jab enough, and he wasn't using feints to set up those shots. But you gotta give credit to him, he kept putting the pressure on, maybe very unlucky not to get the decision in the end, as I thought he definitely won those last 6 rounds, plus the 2 knockdowns I thought was enough to get the decision. The other thing about this fight was the size difference, and for Vargas being the much bigger man, you'd think you'd try to get behind his lead hand. Instead, he was going for the body shots against Ball, and he actually hurt him a couple of times with it. That right looping hand to the body was devastating at times. And I even think Ball was very cautious of the body shots as well at this point. But yeah, it was just a very interesting dynamic in terms of the size difference and the way both guys approached the fight. And hopefully they can get a rematch. I think Nick Ball definitely deserves it, and he'll maybe feel a little bit hard done by, but personally I think he had to have done more in those first 6 rounds. And that 116-110 card, for me, is absolutely shocking. And I do understand the decision for a draw for this fight. I wouldn't call it necessarily a robbery, as there was maybe some close rounds in those last 6. We also had Madrimov and Kurbanov battling it out for the vacant WBA 154 pound title, and maybe a fight that kind of went under the radar. And Madrimov is a fighter I've always really enjoyed watching, especially with his pressure and footwork, but for whatever reason it's just never really kicked off for him. And this opponent in Kurbanov, who has had some probably gift decisions in Russia to him, was without a doubt in a hard fight, as Madrimov used his pressure to really cut off the ring excellently well, where Kurbanov looked to counterpunch. And he uses that shoulder roll style for the most part, but Madrimov was just able to find that left hook and overhand right over the shoulder roll of Kurbanov to land some really powerful clean shots on him, and he just didn't really seem to know what to do against Madrimov. And it was in round 5 Kurbanov really started to kind of shell up and wasn't really giving any output at all. And it was in round 5 he was able to just back up Kurbanov with some leaping hooks, forcing him onto the ropes before landing that beautiful overhand right, leaving the ref no choice but to step in. Personally, I think Madrimov is going to be an issue at 154 pounds for anyone, and I could potentially see some really interesting fights with the likes of Ortiz or even Tim Tszyu over the coming years. And the final 2 fights I just want to touch on are Chamberlain versus Gwynn, who put on a terrific performance and is just an incredible combination puncher, and is definitely one to look out for the future. And it was actually Turk Alishik who actually requested for him to be on his card because it's his favourite fighter, which just shows you he knows his stuff, because this guy definitely has the talent to improve and get in some classic fights I think in the future. And then the other fight was Huni versus Lorena, which is actually quite entertaining. Lorena actually had the opportunities to win the fight, as he hurt Huni a couple of times. I believe it's the second and the last round. But overall, Huni was just the better fighter in between those rounds. But yeah guys, that's my roundup of Knockout Chaos. Personally, I think it was actually quite a good event. There was quite a lot of waiting in between the fights, but overall there was some good performances in there, and obviously AJ stealing the show with that absolutely thunderous knockout at the end. So yeah guys, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Who impressed you the most out of this event? I'd love to know. As always guys, this has been Jamie from Boxing Life. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.